Hope you are ready for our next presentation. Igor Miniailo, lead architect at Adobe. He'll tell us about something architect.
Thank you. I have a strange feeling that it was intentionally that guys turned on a soundtrack from Narcos TV series right before my presentation. So, that doesn't matter. So, today we'll talk about architecture generally, and yeah. So these are my previous year on MageCONF, and you can see here the topics which I highlighted in 2016, 2017, 2018, and we were talking about CQRS. We are talking about the evolution of the API. We are talking about how to decouple our monoliths and how to make it, how to make the architecture to be represented on a way of independent services. And you may see that actually the main idea or the main intention was pretty much the same. So we wanted to provide, so we wanted to decouple the monoliths, we wanted to segregate the interfaces, we wanted to follow the single responsibility principle. Because the single responsibility, like everything actually started in Magento 2 from the single responsibility principle. But firstly, we started to apply it on a class level, then we started to apply it on a broader level, on a level of modules, and now we started to apply it on the level of the whole architecture. So this particular slide I added after yesterday's conversation with Stepan Furman, because actually this is what I'm going to talk. This is what about I'm going to talk today, because we are at Magento, even so that we are incredibly smart people beyond, most of us, of course. We are still human beyond, and we still make mistakes. And actually, like, we make the things wrong. Actually, it's totally okay. Because no one can actually avoid mistakes. But what's important here is that behind all the decisions we make, which sometimes lead to mistakes or instead to some successes, there is a motivation. And the main idea why I'm here and why other guys from Magento are here and or on other conferences as well, we just want you to understand that motivation. Because if you understand that motivation as soon as possible, you may help us to avoid mistakes, or you eventually you would not blame us so strong as you usually do. So today I would like to highlight our motivation for the most ambitious products since the release of Magento 2. So the decoupling the monoliths and the way how we are doing it. Because as you may see, like as you already probably seen on a previous slide, that we had an intention to decouple the monoliths, to decouple several years ago, and even some particular technical approaches which we wanted to apply to decouple that monolith changed from that time, and there were reasons why that approach has changed. So currently, I want to talk how exactly and what exactly we want to do to decouple the monolith. Yeah, but you know, like some people like gambling, some people not. I belong to the first one, and when people like to gamble, sometimes they lose. And 2 days ago, I participated in a drinking contest, and actually, I lost. So that, as a result of that contest, I had to put this onto my nose during the presentation. But even so, that you see this clown nose on my face, the topic which I'm going to highlight is really important and it's really serious. And today, so the spoiler for the presentation. Even so that we are talking, and you probably already heard from Krill's presentation, from Konasov's presentation, from you will hear it from the Misha Slavko presentation, that we are introducing so many new stuff, but actually the main idea is that we are introducing this stuff along with our existing analytical product. So that we are not going to introduce backward incompatible changes. And our main idea is to preserve forward compatibility as much as possible. So this is very important. So that if you're currently relying on our APIs, you should be pretty much safe. And probably you're already supposed to notice that starting from Magenta 2.3.0, we're really seriously keeping backward compatibility into account. We did not release several features just because they introduce slight changes which potentially may break one of your customizations. So that even so we're talking about decoupling monoliths, even so we're talking about such sophisticated and new stuff we're going to introduce to the platform, along with that we are not going to break what already exists. So probably that's enough. So I want to address this question to you. What are the main flaws, what are the main issues in Magenta you see right now? Just to make sure that further, because the next slide actually the list of issues which we see the most important. So just to make sure that your vision and our vision are the same, so we're on the same page. So the question is to the audience. What are the main issues of Magenta right now you are dealing with? Scalability. Performance. Complexity. What? Bugs? Okay. Okay. So, one of those issues, or one of the reasons of those issues, is that the backward incompatible upgrades. Anton Krill already mentioned that during his presentation. And if you will just calculate all the negative feedbacks we get regarding the platform, so most of these feedbacks are coming from most of these feedbacks are related to the backward incompatible upgrades. And why actually it happens? Because it happens. And later, actually, I will describe why. But these backward incompatible upgrades come in even patch releases, and backward incompatible releases make you stay on the outdated technology. It prevents you from upgrading to the latest version of the platform. So it's a big problem for us, because we are, as developers, as architects of the platform, always want you to be on the latest version of Magenta, of course. Because for us, it would be much easier than support all the different versions of the platform, including Magenta 1. So another problem, that application is growth in size. And while our application grows in size, this introduced, actually as a side effect, it impacts your customizations. Because your customization actually grows in size as well. And that's a problem for you. And another problem is the big bang releases. Taking into account that our code base is constantly growing, so we need to make so many efforts to release even a patch release. So that we need to prepare all the components, we need to go through the CI/CD processes, and so on and so forth. And then we need to proceed with the regression, both manual and automatical regression. So we have to deal with a lot of resources which is spent just for the release preparation. Just because we release all the platform as a whole, not component by component. And actually that's a problem for us, because we want you to, if something ready, to put it to the market and provide you an ability to be an early adopter and start to use its functionality immediately, but not to keep it in a dev branch. And actually that's the goals which are supposed to be accomplished by this strategical movement of Magenta on decoupling of the monoliths. So first of all, we wanted to introduce the component replaceability. So that That would be especially helpful for big merchants, so that some of the Magenta services would be just substituted, completely substituted with some third-party services, even SaaS-based services. Another thing is the Granule upgradability. So that we, as I already mentioned, we want to provide the possibility for you, if you have a necessity, for example, just to upgrade one particular component, not upgrading the whole system. Because in this case, the cost of upgrade for you would be way low than to upgrade the whole system. Scalability and performance, addressing your particular concern. So yeah, we want the platform be scalable, ideally horizontally scalable, and along with it, so this is kind of the fourth item here can be considered as a subsequence of the third one. So we want to have the agile platform. So we want to provide the possibility for merchant to start small and grow beyond bigger and bigger, targeting the upmarket, not making drastic replatforming, not making drastic refactoring. So the growth should be smooth from that perspective. And you already seen this slide on Konasov's presentation. Probably you will see that slide on somebody else's presentation as well. So this is actually the slide from our technical vision regarding the service isolation. So the problem, and actually the reason of most of the problem which I mentioned earlier, is the monolithical structure of our code base. And so that we have so many coupling, so many dependencies among different components, even not intended dependencies. So for us, it's really hard to introduce changes to the code base. And actually, that's why, to account that we have so many dependencies among these layers, the changes we want to introduce to particular layer, to particular class, may break. So we don't particularly know how many extensions, how many customization may be possibly affected because of this nature of the dependencies, of the cross dependencies. And actually, that's the problem. And I talked about that probably 2 years ago regarding the API and SPI. So one of the reasons for that is that in the theory of programming, the interface can be used two ways. It can be used either API way, when this interface just beyond called by your business logic. So you're just using particular interface in your business logic. Or another way, if you are extending or providing own implementation for existing interface, but you are not directly call it. An example of those can be the search adapter, so that instead of, let's say, MySQL adapter, you provide implementation of the Elasticsearch adapter. So you just provide implementation, and you just substitute the implementation where, let's say in Magento, it's DI-XML. And the problem is that when particular interface can be considered both API and SPI. Why? Because if you don't know whether your interface is either API or SPI, you end up with no evolution at all for this interface. So modification of existing behavior, like SPI and API, you can see that it's just not possible to introduce any changes to this either class or interface. And probably those of you who use Magento in a headless way, they know that we have a versioning for our REST API. And the current version for all the interfaces is the version 1. And why? Not because all the interfaces are just perfect from the very beginning and we don't want to introduce any changes after they release. The reason for that is that we just can't. Because if we will introduce any changes, we will break one of you, or maybe all of you. It depends on what changes we will introduce and to what particular interface we will introduce them. So then we want our platform to evolve. And the availability of the platform guaranteed by isolation of services and stable APIs. So currently, in Magento in current state, we are trying to preserve stability of the APIs. But it's not possible to use it in a microservice way. By the way, internally we don't use the term microservice, and there is a reason for that, because there are not a lot of things in Magenta which could be considered as micro. That's why we have own term like service isolation. And from the very beginning, so the Magenta, as you may consider it right now, actually consists from two different applications. And you're dealing with these applications on a day-to-day basis. Currently, this separation happened on a level of areas. So that we have the admin HTML area, we have the storefront area, and actually these applications are storefront application where the main user of the system is a shopper and another system, so the admin panel, where the main user of the system is either admin or merchant. So there are two different systems. And for a long time, we tried to consider that this is just two different representations. So these are two different areas. And actually, that was the reason why we are still struggling, because, for example, even the version of the APIs we introduced in Magenta 2, our service layer, existing version of the service layer, it's more admin-specific, while not shopper-specific, while not storefront-specific. And when we, after many iterations, we realized that probably it will really help to us if we will have just two different sets of interfaces for storefront and for store management. That will actually help us a lot, and actually that will help you a lot, because if you just consider these two systems as two independent systems, and when I say independent application, first of all, I mean that they're going to be independently installable and independently scalable, independently deployable. So that will help us a lot. So that's how we came up to this diagram. So you already seen this diagram probably on 2 or 3 presentations. But actually, this is how it appeared. So we decided that we have not one system, but we have actually two systems, which are currently coupled to each other. So we have really high coupling between two systems. And now we're trying to decouple these two systems. And you may ask that, if you're saying that these are two systems, but we still have the same component there. And we also consider that the components, for example, catalog and catalog, gonna be the same in both of these systems. And we wanted to avoid the duplication, so we wanted not to make the copy-pasting of the services between two systems, so that we all that got us back again and again. But then we actually understood, and the Adobe acquisition helped us a lot. Because what Adobe acquisition did with Magenta, it made Magenta to target upper market. And when Magenta started to target upper market, we started to have more and more conversation with system integrators who work with big merchants. We started to work with big merchants, and actually those big merchants who considering to use Magenta, they already have some e-commerce system in place. And most of these e-commerce are either enterprise resource planning system, customer resource management, product informational management system, so on and so forth. So they are not starting from the scratch. They have already some e-commerce systems established. So that they are just considering Magenta as a lightweight storefront. And that's true. So really big merchants, especially those who use Hybris or Salesforce, they consider Magenta as a lightweight storefront. And actually, I'm glad that you are not laughing here at this point of time. So yeah, that's important. So we are still on the same page. So this is how we decided that, especially for these big merchants, this is going to be their most point of interest in Magenta. Because the admin panel is not really interested because they already have some ERP system and they are managing products in that ERP or product information management. They also have the system where they manage orders. They also have the external system where they manage customers and so on and so forth. So actually they don't need our store management system at all. So that we need to organize the process and we need to organize the code base the way that we may just improve our storefront, not impacting our store management system at all. So here's actually the example of the replaceability. So on one of my first slides, I mentioned that the replaceability for us is the main criteria for this track. So here you may see how order management and inventory management was just fully substituted with one of enterprise Magento offering, which is Magento Order Management, which is SaaS-based service. And the storefront application is not even aware about that. And here you may see another thing that PWA presentation layer was substituted with IAM provided by Adobe. So the presentation layer is fully changed. And what? The storefront application is not aware about it. It's not impacted. Everything goes smooth. Is it cool? Right answer. So this is regarding how we decided to split both of the systems, because as I already mentioned, and this is like for most of us, we considered that storefront and store management is still part of the same system. And we iterated over, and actually domain-driven design helped us a lot. Because one of the main things which domain-driven design introduced for software developers is ubiquitous language. So that we started to talk to merchants and to system integrators who work on a big project. And actually we've seen that they consider some parts, some components of our store management system, and they call them different way. They call it not a catalog, for example, but product information management. Instead of checkout, they call it CPQ. Instead of customer, they call it CRM management. So and that's why we came to the idea that our store management application is supposed to represent is a really lightweight and replaceable version of the system, of each of those systems, to provide an ability just easily substituted for those merchants who actually now need this functionality and who use something external. And even regarding the scalability, if you will consider even technical requirements for storefront and store management, you will see that these requirements are different. Because, for example, even the read-write ratio for storefront is completely different than it's for store management. Because for the storefront, read-write ratio is going to be probably 95:5 or 98:2. I mean, the percentage of read-to-write queries. While for the store management, this ratio is going to be different, and you may expect much more write queries, much more requests, which modify the state of the system. And here's desirable state. So on the desirable state, you see that that's how we started to decouple both of these applications. So here you may see that entry point for storefront application is React-based, currently React PWA storefront, but React is just the implementation we work in Magento. But nothing prevents you as a system integrator, for example, to use a Vue storefront. It's especially taking into account how the technology stack fastly change on the market, because you know it regarding the knockout and the UI components. So that, and Magento is a big system, and all the big systems have are inert. So that when we make a decision and when we introduce this solution to the market, the mood on the market may change, and the fashion may change, and there would be another cool JavaScript framework in place of the one we used before. So actually one of the things just to make sure you're on the same page with us. Why we actually chosen GraphQL for the storefront? Actually, there are two reasons here. So the Evolvable Api, so several slides ago I mentioned that our existing service contracts are not evolvable, that our REST API still has a version 1, and probably it will be always in the version 1. But it's not happen with the GraphQL, because GraphQL ideally is versionless, because GraphQL provides you a possibility to return just the requested data. So that if you decide to introduce the, if you consider that you want to deprecate something, instead of removing it, you can just introduce another field to that particular entry point. And if all the client logic will start to request that new field, we may not break anything, but just add new functionality to the existing entry points. So this is availability of the API is very important for us. And another thing is the patch support. So, and when we say patch support, actually what we mean here is that one of the problems of the existing service layer is that it's really REST specific, so that we retrieve the entity as a whole and we persist entity as a whole. Even so that there are so many scenarios, and especially for the storefront, when you need just to show a limited set of attributes, like mini shopping cart, for example, when we need to show just 4 different attributes of product, like SKU, image, URL, and the title, and actually that's all. So you don't need to retrieve all the data from the product repository, wait while all the extension attributes would be added to this entity, and then persist it as a whole, because we don't need it. We just want to, for this particular business scenario, we want to operate with a limited number of attributes for this particular entity. GraphQL provides that. And here how we started to proceed with implementation. So as it was already mentioned, we tried to do it several times with the existing Magenta monolith. But each time, and actually you may just expect that when we will try to introduce these changes to the existing application, the changes would be so drastic, that the changes would be so backward incompatible, so that they will be impacting you with each particular upgrade of the system. And we want to prevent that. We want for you to make the Magenta upgrade process as easy as possible, as smooth as possible. By the way, who considers that Magenta upgrade process became easy since Magenta 2.3.0 because we put so many efforts there? Does anybody consider that the upgrade process got easier? Come on, don't be shy.
Sorry, buddy. No luck.
So, many people consider that the process became easier. And so we decided to make this system, make this ambitious project alongside with what we already have. So that we are not breaking anything, we're just preserving what we have right now, but we started to build it as a greenfield development. And we started to do it layer by layer because we did not know all the requirements, especially for the deepest layer here. So we started to build it from the client, from the presentation layer, and then the client introduced us the requirements for the underneath layer. Because we realized building the PWA, because the initial version of PWA also used the REST API. So then we realized that we now need REST, and for us it would be much performance efficient to use GraphQL. And actually that's what needed for Storefront. If you now need the whole set of attributes, no need to transfer this attribute over wire, no need to retrieve that attribute from the data storage, no need to persist them. Then we started to introduce the GraphQL. So who knows that we already have the GraphQL coverage since 2.3.0? Do you know? That along with SOAP, REST, we added GraphQL coverage. So we introduced it, and we are still increasing this coverage, so that you may see that the coverage, we are adding more and more GraphQL endpoints. And yeah, actually that's good. But the initial implementation of our GraphQL resolvers still used our service contracts. So that all the benefits of the GraphQL were neglected because existing service contracts still retrieve entity as a whole and persist it as a whole. So we almost did not get performance increase. So actually the highest performance boost we got was not sending the data over wire back and forth. So then, when and actually introducing the GraphQL endpoints, GraphQL schemas, we actually established the API. And this API is supposed to be forward compatible till forever. But what it gives to us, so it gives us API stable, and what it gives to you? It gives to you the stable API layer while we can still improve the performance and change the implementation underneath. You know, like an architect, I usually ask guys who make review of the, especially from reviews coming from community, that the main our point should be reviewing interfaces and the public APIs beyond introduced, while not the implementation. Because implementation we may change any minute. It's not a problem for us to release new implementation, for example, which fix some performance degradation or whatever. But the real big problem for us is to change the API which we released. So that's how we start to introduce the Storefront API. So the Storefront API actually is supposed to provide this patch upgradability for entities. And then we have branching. And this branching is not like conditional logic in PHP. So of course we don't like conditional logic, so don't consider it that way. So the branching actually is the way how your particular application is deployed. Either it's a monolithical branch, or you have the service-isolated, distributed deployment. For here, it's pretty straightforward. We just need to introduce additional new database access layer. So Konosov told you about that an hour ago, because our existing entity manager or resource model are not efficient to work on that particular stuff, working with just a limited set of attributes. So that we need to introduce new database access layer. You may consider it as a ORM, but actually it's not going to be ORM because we will be mostly working with fields. So another name we consider it was FRM, but we decided that probably we need to rethink it a little bit. But here I would like to talk about this branch more. Yeah, so on a diagram you already seen this BFF stuff, and Anton mentioned that BFF during his presentation. And just to make sure that BFF doesn't stand for the best friend forever, it stands for the backend for frontends. And why we actually have this layer at all? Because the presentation layer should not know about whether the application is deployed as a monolith or microservices. So it's supposed to consider that the server side of the application always monolith, because it's much easier to understand it that way. Because if the presentation layer will know about many services behind the scenes, it's supposed to update the URLs with the services. It's supposed to introduce some auto-discovery, and all the changes to the server side will lead to upgrades of the client as well. So we don't want to do that. We want to have really dumb connections, and we want to have really dumb client from that perspective. So the client should not know about whether application is distributed or monolithical. So the BFF actually is supposed to accept external requests and map it to internal services. And here, actually, why we are making this split for modulus. Because if the applications should be deployed separately, it's supposed to consist from different modules. And probably you've seen that in multi-source inventory, that one of the major things we introduced there, so we started to create independent modules for API. Here's, by the way how the Storefront API are created for the catalog. And you may see the difference in comparison, for example, to the product repository you have right now. So that Storefront API are really lightweight, and they may work even with arrays. So they are really compatible with the way how data transferred from the GraphQL. So here, if you just scan this QR code, actually I'm not really sure whether people still scanning QR codes, but I'm old school guy, so I'm putting the QR codes here. And yeah, so the API must be fast. And yeah, and this is how we started to improve our existing GraphQL implementation. So that instead of introducing this lightweight API, instead of our existing services, we started to make all the handling of all the incoming requests through the Storefront API. And currently, the implementation of the APIs is not perfect. So that currently we end up with making the direct queries to database, direct SQL queries, not making that through the ORM layer, which currently is absent. But that would be another layer which we will build, making providing the whole requirements while building the Storefront API layer. And you may see here, even on these graphics, that our existing implementation with introduced Store APIs are much faster than it was before with Magenta services, which exist right now in most of the Magenta modules. And the most complex part for service isolation is actually not building the services, but establishing the communication between the services. And actually, because why? Because the network is a scary place to be. And here you may see the misassumption which developers usually do while they are developing their business logic, implementing some particular functionality. So I already mentioned that, for example, in MSI we separated the API modules out of the implementation. So this is how it's supposed to be deployed. So for example, we have two independent services, like checkout and catalog, but checkout still have a dependency on a catalog. So what needs to be done here? We need to deploy API dependency, so the module of the API of the catalog. And here, Magenta will introduce the infrastructural layer, which responsibility is to understand what particular deployment mode we have. Either it's distributed or monolithical. And if it's distributed, we may, let's say, co-generate proxies for this layer of APIs. These proxies will direct queries via HTTP to independently deployed catalog service. And actually, this is the trickiest part, because this layer, which is called service mesh, is responsible for delivering these messages. So you can consider it as a kind of TCP/IP, so which responsibility is just to make communication happen, whatever it takes. And but this is network, and if something went wrong in network, this layer, for example, should provide you with a set of patterns, like a circuit breaker, like bulkhead patterns, so that because the distributed application and the tendency in the distributed application is that even small fault in some non-really important components may lead to the really big failure of the whole cluster. Okay. Slava just told me that I have 5 more minutes. So actually, here you may see, just to make you understand the main difference between the BFF and the service mesh. So the BFF actually route traffic from north to south, from external point to the internal ones, while the service mesh distribute traffic internally. So that if you have the checkout service, which depends on other internal services, the calls may be distributed inside. Okay? another schema here. And actually, the main reason for the schema is just to show that how components should be easily substitutable. And currently, the only way to test them is using MFTF, our acceptance testing framework. So acceptance tests are not optional anymore. They're absolutely mandatory because the number of permutations which you need to test your system is just enormous. So we really encourage, we really beg you to use the MFTF. That will save so much time for you at the production time. We will introduce the autoscaling, of course. And eventually it will lead to the independently releasable components which avoid us, which prevent us from the big bang releases. Sagas, Ricardo already told about that. And I really encourage you to listen about the alternative checkout flow presented today by Evgen Sentyabov, probably the next talk after mine, or maybe in an hour, I don't know. And another stuff that we really considering to using UUID for entities identity. Ping us either in community Slack channel or in architectural GitHub repo. And we have new MageZine, which the new issue of MageZine brought by Lukasz today. So I really recommend to read this magazine. We put there quite a lot of articles from Magenta architectural team. So this issue contains 3 or 4 articles and the news of what's happening in Magenta architectural team as well. So this is the magazine fully devoted for Magenta. And thank you.